save the rest for after dinner.
There are very few movies this year carrying the kind of pressure sitting on The Mandalorian and Grogu. On paper, it should be a celebration. Star Wars is finally returning to theaters after nearly 7 years away, and Lucasfilm is bringing back two of the most beloved characters the franchise has created in the Disney era. In fact, the movie opens like it has something to prove. It wastes almost no time establishing that this is a big screen version of The Mandalorian, not a stretched-out TV episode pretending to be a film. We move from an Imperial warlord meeting into a run of action scenes that instantly remind you why Din Djarin and Grogu became such a phenomenon in the first place. They work as a duo. That sounds obvious, but a movie like this lives or dies on chemistry, rhythm, and the audience wanting to spend more hours with these characters. The film gets that part right almost immediately. Din is sharp, aggressive, and efficient. Grogu is cuter than ever, but more importantly, more useful than ever. Together, they feel like a tag team that has fully evolved, and the action is where this movie is most obviously flexing its theatrical upgrade. Din was already a strong fighter in the series, but here he feels elevated into something fiercer and more cinematic. He is not just surviving encounters anymore. He is cutting through them. There is a precision and brutality to some of his combat scenes that makes him feel closer to one of Star Wars' deadliest operatives than to a tired dad stumbling from mission to mission. Grogu, meanwhile, gets to show off Force abilities in a way that feels bigger, smoother, and more crowd-pleasing than before. The movie clearly understands that audiences showed up wanting to see the little guy do more than blink, flip, and steal snacks. It gives them that. And yes, when those powers are paired with full IMAX-sized action, giant machines, and explosive set pieces, it absolutely works. At the same time, the film does not forget why people fell in love with this pairing in the first place. If you are here for the father-son dynamic, the movie feeds you well. Din is still making sure Grogu is strapped in, still trying to keep him from getting too reckless, and still radiating that exhausted space dad energy that made the original show feel so charming. The movie wisely does not drown itself in sentiment, but it knows those little domestic beats matter. They are the glue. They are what stopped this from becoming just another loud Star Wars action reel. There is still warmth here, and most of the time it lands exactly when it needs to. That focus is ultimately the film's greatest strength. The Mandalorian and Grogu is not pretending to be something grander than it is. It is not secretly trying to become a Skywalker saga replacement, and it is not desperately reaching for a giant mythology-shaking reveal every 15 minutes. The movie is about Din Djarin and Grogu. That is the pitch, that is the title, and to its credit, that is the movie. In an era where so many franchise films seem terrified of their own premise and constantly overextend themselves, trying to tease 5 more projects, there is something refreshing about a Star Wars movie that actually commits to its own center. Now, that does not mean every choice works perfectly. The strangest gamble in the film is unquestionably Rotta the Hutt. Yes, Jabba's son is here, and yes, seeing him in live action is about as weird as you would expect. Maybe weirder. The most jarring part is not even his physical design, though a heavily muscled head definitely takes some recalibration. It is the way he speaks. If you go in expecting another grunting, grotesque, slimy Hutt presence, Rotta will throw you off fast. He talks more like a normal guy than a slug crime lord, and that takes some adjusting. There are moments where the movie asks you to accept him on pure confidence alone, and early on I was not fully sure it would pull that off, but to the film's credit, it mostly does. Rotta gradually becomes a more emotionally workable character than he first appears to be, and the movie eventually stops daring you to accept the concept and simply folds him into the adventure. That is probably the best thing I can say about him. He never fully stops being odd, but he becomes the kind of odd Star Wars has always survived on. And once you accept that, he starts working more than you might expect. The real surprise, though, may be the Anzellans. Somehow, in a movie starring Grogu, these tiny chaos gremlins almost walk away with the comedy crown. They are hilarious, weirdly adorable, and responsible for some of the movie's best laugh lines. It is exactly the kind of side creature success Star Wars has always thrived on when it is in a playful mood. If this movie has one area where it really understands the crowd, it is in its use of creatures and comic timing. The tone stays light on its feet even when the story gets more serious, and that balance helps a lot. Where the movie becomes more divisive, I think, is in how little it seems interested in reshaping the wider Star Wars landscape. If you went in hoping this film would deeply explore the New Republic, push the larger post-Empire timeline forward, or set up a massive new era-defining villain, you may walk out feeling a little unnerved. The trailer suggested a deeper look at the New Republic's instability and the growing threat of Imperial remnants, but the film only touches that territory lightly. It is present, but it is not the main meal. There are no giant mythology detonations here, no earth-shaking cameos, no heavy-handed attempts to blow open the franchise's future. Even the villains feel more self-contained than era-defining, and honestly, that is where some viewers will see the movie's biggest weakness, while others will see its smartest move, because yes, Lucasfilm absolutely could have used this movie as a giant statement piece. They could have gone harder, riskier, stranger, and more ambitious in a way that tried to prove Star Wars was back and ready to dominate again. But the safer choice also has value right now. After years of uneven movies, divisive streaming output, and a fan base that can turn every creative decision into trench warfare, there is something to be said for a movie that simply aims to entertain, succeeds at entertaining, and does not break the franchise in the process. That may sound like faint praise, but it really is not. Franchises this large do not always need to swing for immortality. Sometimes they need to remind people why they liked showing up in the first place. That is exactly what The Mandalorian and Grogu does. It is funny, sweet, energetic, occasionally emotional, and full of crowd-pleasing action. No, it is not toppling The Empire Strikes Back. No, it is not reinventing Star Wars, but it is also not embarrassing the brand, collapsing under the weight of lore, or mistaking chaos for creativity. It understands the assignment. More importantly, it understands its audience. And right now, that may be enough to count as a real win. The Mandalorian and Grogu is the kind of movie that reminds you Star Wars does not always have to aim for canon-shattering importance to be worked. 8 watching.